She thought marrying a rich man meant her struggles were over, but that mansion held storms no one warned her about. The first time Amara walked into the Vanderwells estate, she wore her Sunday best and a heart full of hope. Her dark skin shimmered under the chandelier light, her curls pinned like a crown, her posture regal in a dress stitched by her own mama's hands. But all Margaret Vanderwells saw was a girl who didn't belong. "Oh," Margaret had said, lips curled like a velvet whip. "I assumed you were the new event planner. You're very polished." Polished? That's what she called Amara. Not beautiful, not brilliant, not her son's wife. Just polished. Like a silver spoon someone mistook for sterling. Amara smiled that day, the kind of smile black women carry like armor. But her palms were trembling beneath the silk napkin she held. She was now the wife of Harrison Vanderwells, heir to a Southern legacy wrapped in wealth, privilege, and picture-perfect family portraits. But they never imagined those portraits could include a woman with skin like hers. She remembered the way Harrison squeezed her hand gently, whispering, "Just give her time." But time didn't soften prejudice. It only taught it to whisper sweeter. At dinner, Margaret praised Amara's eloquence, surprised that she knew the difference between Bordeaux and Burgundy. She complimented her discipline for staying slim. And when guests arrived, she'd introduce Amara with phrases like, "She's quite the modern woman, you know. Raised herself from modest beginnings. Very inspirational." As if she were a case study, not family. Amara had fought so hard to sit at that table. But she'd soon learn. Just 'cause you're seated don't mean you're welcome. That night after the gala planning meeting, Margaret leaned close. Her breath smelled of wine and lavender bitterness. She said, "Just make sure the waitstaff know their entrances and exits. We want it to be seamless. You do understand, since you've been on that side before. Yes?" Amara's stomach dropped. She wasn't the help. She was the bride, the one Harrison had chosen, the one he loved. But in Margaret's eyes, she was still the outsider, the dark girl from the South Side who dared to dream too high. And still, Amara held her head high, because she knew something Margaret didn't. Some crowns don't shine. They burn, forged in fire, not gold. But that fire, it was just beginning to rise. And then Amara found the guest list for the gala. Her name wasn't even on it. Amara stood by the bay window, clutching the ivory cardstock in her hands. The guest list for the Vanderwells Foundation Gala, printed on linen paper with embossed gold, had everyone from CEOs to senators. But no Amara Vanderwells, just a blank space beside Harrison's name, like she was a shadow, like she wasn't real. Her lips trembled, but her eyes stayed dry. That's the thing about being raised by black women. You learn how to bleed without showing red. When Harrison walked into the room, she held the paper up like a mirror. "I'm not on it." He blinked, confused. "What?" "Your mother made a list. A perfect list, with perfect names. But I guess I wasn't perfect enough." He took the paper, brows furrowed. That must be a mistake. But Amara had already learned. In that house, erasure wasn't a mistake. It was a design. Later that night, she watched from the staircase as Margaret instructed the catering team, the decorators, the PR people. Every detail of the gala was rehearsed like a ballet. Then she heard it. "Make sure there are no incidents. We can't have guests uncomfortable, especially with the dynamic this year." Dynamic. That was Margaret's word for her. Dynamic. Like her presence might disrupt the floral arrangements. Amara wanted to scream, to throw crystal at the marble floor and make them see her. But instead, she made tea, sat in silence, and remembered what her mama always told her. "Baby, sometimes silence is a louder answer than words." That silence, it grew thick, heavy, almost holy, until the night of the gala came. Amara wore red, not wine red, not muted burgundy, fire red. The kind of red that makes you look twice, the kind that says, "You don't get to erase me." When she walked into the ballroom, heads turned. Margaret's jaw clenched. "Amara," she said, fake smile in place. "I believe the servers are meeting in the kitchen." Amara smiled back. "I wouldn't know. I'm not the help." She walked past her, shoulders back, spine straight. But Margaret wasn't finished. Halfway through the night, Amara overheard her. "She carries herself well," Margaret whispered to a board member's wife. "But you can't polish a walnut and call it pearl." And that was the moment something broke inside Amara. Not a fragile thing, a sacred thing. Her dignity didn't shatter. It rose. And just when she thought she couldn't bear another moment, Harrison walked up to the podium, smiled, and said, "There's someone I want you all to hear from tonight." He handed the microphone to Amara, and baby, she took it. You want to hear what she said? The ballroom quieted like someone had pulled a string on the sky. Amara stood there, wrapped in red satin and centuries of buried voices, holding that microphone like it was a sword. Some eyes were curious, some confused. Margaret's? Cold and cutting, like ice clinking in a crystal glass. But Amara didn't blink. She let the silence settle, let it breathe, and then she spoke. "I wasn't supposed to be here tonight." Her voice, soft but steady, curled through the chandelier, light like smoke rising from an altar. "My name isn't on the program. My place card never arrived. But I showed up anyway." A murmur moved through the crowd. "I grew up watching women like my mother serve tables at events like this. Beautiful, dark-skinned women. Women you'd walk past without a second glance. Women who knew the scent of expensive perfume, but not the feel of it on their own skin." She paused, eyes locking with Margaret's. "You called them the help, but I called them queens. Women who worked 2 jobs and still had time to press your dress shirts. Women who carried babies on one hip and dreams on the other. Women who learned to be invisible, just so others could shine." Her hands didn't shake. Her voice didn't falter. "But I won't be invisible. Not tonight." Some guests shifted in their seats. Others leaned in. "I married into this family thinking love was enough. But love in a mansion without respect is just another kind of prison." She saw Harrison's eyes water, but he didn't move. "I have been smiled at, praised for my poise, called articulate, like it's a surprise. I've been erased from seating charts, cropped from family photos, and whispered about, like a stain on satin." She took a breath, deep, ancestral. "But I am not ashamed of my skin. My skin is the color of mahogany, of molasses, of midnight thunder. My skin is not something to overlook. It's something to honor." Applause rose, slow but building. Amara closed her eyes. "And to the young girl watching this, maybe working in the kitchen tonight, wondering if she'll ever be more than the help. Baby, you already are. You always were. Your worth ain't measured by who accepts you, but by who you refuse to shrink for." When she opened her eyes, the room was standing. Except Margaret. She remained seated, her face stone, her pearls trembling at her throat. But Amara didn't need her applause. She had the truth. And for once, everyone heard it. And just as the room began to settle, Margaret stood up, eyes burning, and walked toward the stage. "You want to know what she said when she got close?" Margaret's heels tapped slow across the marble floor. Not rushed, not panicked, calculated. That woman knew how to perform elegance like a religion. When she reached the stage, the crowd parted like water. She took the microphone, gently, too gently, from Amara's hand. Her smile was all teeth, no warmth. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, voice dripping with sugar that hid the salt. What a passionate speech, truly. A testimony to how far we've come, and how much emotion still lives inside those journeys. She turned slightly, angling her body toward Amara like a poised dagger. "But let's not forget the purpose of this evening. We are here to raise funds for children in need, not to relitigate ancient wounds. After all, we can't move forward if we're still dragging ghosts behind us." Amara's stomach tightened. Margaret continued. "And my dear Amara, you speak beautifully. Really, you remind me of a young Maya Angelou. Though of course Maya never stood behind a podium paid for by her husband's family." The crowd gasped, collectively. It was a slap delivered in pearls and poise. Harrison stepped forward, his voice firm. "Mother." But Amara stopped him with just a look. Still, silent power. She turned to Margaret and spoke just loud enough for only her to hear. "I may not have your name, Margaret, but I have something you'll never own." Margaret tilted her head. "And what's that, dear?" Amara smiled. "Peace." Then she turned, slowly, deliberately, and walked off that stage like a woman who'd just buried her chains. But as she passed the table where the family sat, something caught her eye. A folded envelope, her name on it, written in Harrison's grandfather's handwriting, the one who passed just 2 weeks before, the one who called her child when no one else in that house would. She picked it up, carefully. Inside was a letter, and something that looked like a legal document. Her hands froze. At the bottom of the page, just before the ink faded, it said, "To Amara Vander Wells, heir and sole executor of the Oakmont Trust." The letter trembled in Amara's hands like it carried the breath of ghosts. She slipped into the powder room, locked the door behind her, and sat on the velvet stool beneath the mirror. Her red dress shimmered under soft light, but her heart was pounding louder than the chandelier outside. The letter was written in fine cursive, the kind older men write when they still believe their words hold power. "My dearest Amara, if you're reading this, then I'm gone. But you were never invisible to me, child. I saw the way they looked through you, like your beauty didn't count, like your dignity didn't fit in their lineage of wine-stained portraits and pearl-handled lies. But I saw you." Tears welled, but Amara blinked them back. "Not yet. I come from old money, yes, but that don't mean I come from clean money. This family's wealth, it was built on silence, and too many women like you, buried in it. You reminded me of my grandmother, Henrietta, dark as the Mississippi mud, and twice as strong. She raised me while my own mother drank herself into ballroom dreams. You carry that same thunder, girl." Amara clutched the paper tighter. "That's why I rewrote the Oakmont Trust. You're the only one I trust with what's left. The land, the shares, the decisions. Let 'em howl. Let 'em throw their fits. But when the dust clears, the crown will be yours. Signed, Benjamin Augustus Vander Wells." She exhaled. It wasn't just money. It was ownership. It was legacy. It was power. And she hadn't begged for it. She hadn't schemed. She had simply stood in truth and been seen. A knock came at the door. "Amara?" Harrison's voice, gentle. "You okay?" She opened the door slowly, holding the letter like a newborn. He read it in silence, then looked up. "Did you know about this?" she asked. He shook his head. "No, but I'm glad he did it." And for the first time in weeks, she believed him. But just as peace started to soften her shoulders, they heard it. Raised voices in the hallway. Margaret. Amara stepped out and found her screaming at Mr. Langford, the family attorney. "I don't care what Benjamin signed. That girl is not part of the Vander Wells legacy. She doesn't have the blood. She doesn't—" She turned, saw Amara standing there, and froze. Amara walked forward, calm, graceful. She handed the letter to Mr. Langford. "Looks like I am now." Margaret's eyes burned. But this time she had no microphone, no chandelier, no audience. Just truth and consequences. But before Margaret could respond, Harrison stepped forward and said something that would change everything. Harrison's voice was low, but the weight of it silenced the hallway. "Mother, you should stop before you embarrass yourself further." Margaret narrowed her eyes. "Excuse me." He stepped closer, calm, firm, like a son, no longer under his mother's spell. "I know about Henrietta, about grandfather's will, about the real history of this family. The black woman who raised him, loved him, saved this legacy from crumbling." Margaret paled. "That was over a century ago, and still more honorable than anything you've done in this one." Amara watched as Margaret's mask cracked. Just a flicker, a twitch in her jaw, a tremble in her pearls. Then Harrison turned to Amara. "My mother told me once that love is what preserves legacy. But that's not true. Truth preserves it. And you are the most truthful thing this family has had in generations." Amara blinked. It wasn't a grand gesture. It wasn't a romantic speech, but it was something rarer. A man standing up, not just for love, but for justice. Margaret scoffed. "She has no lineage here. She's not blood." Amara stepped forward, eyes steady. "Neither are you to Henrietta." The words hit harder than any slap, because Margaret knew. Deep down, she knew her power was inherited through silence, not sacrifice, through erasure, not honor. Langford, the lawyer, cleared his throat. Per Benjamin Vander Wells' final directive, Amara is to assume full control over the Oakmont Trust and its assets, effective immediately. That includes the mansion. Silence. Then Margaret laughed. The mansion? Langford nodded. Yes, ma'am. Amara looked up at the golden chandelier, the same one that had sparkled above her head the first night she was called polished. The same ceiling that once felt so high, so unreachable. Now, it belonged to her. But she didn't gloat. She just breathed. Deep, holy. You can pack your things tomorrow, she said softly. Take what you need. I won't keep your pearls. Margaret turned to Harrison. You're letting her do this? Throw us out of our home? He shook his head. She's not throwing us out. She's claiming what was always hers. And then, Margaret said the thing that changed everything. Something that shattered the room like broken stained glass. Something no one, not even Amara, could have seen coming. She said, she is blood. That's why this is happening. She's his. And baby. The air stopped moving. You want to know who she meant by his? She's his. The words echoed through the marble corridor like thunder trapped inside a teacup. Amara froze. Whose? She whispered, her voice barely audible. Margaret didn't answer right away. Her shoulders, always square and proud, sagged just slightly, like truth had finally cornered her. Langford looked confused, Harrison stunned, and then Margaret turned her gaze toward the grand portrait at the end of the hallway, the one of Benjamin Augustus Vander Wells in his younger days, standing beside a black woman with kind eyes, her features faded by time and deliberate brushstrokes. Henrietta. I told him it was a mistake, Margaret muttered, more to herself than anyone else. Told him not to open that door again, but he was always sentimental, always trying to rewrite what couldn't be undone. Amara stepped forward. What are you saying? Margaret's eyes locked onto hers. I'm saying you're not just some girl my son married. You're family, whether you like it or not. The hallway held its breath. Amara's legs weakened. Harrison moved to steady her, but she held up a hand. She needed to stand on her own. You're saying I'm Benjamin's granddaughter? Margaret nodded. Your grandmother. Henrietta's daughter. Her name was Ruth, wasn't it? Amara blinked. Yes, she was Benjamin's child, born in silence, raised in secrecy. The one mistake he never had the courage to claim. But he left her something, quietly, over the years, little by little. Amara remembered the strange checks that came when her mother was struggling, the envelopes with no return address, the letters her mama never opened. He always wanted to bring her back into the family, but pride and shame, they're like twin serpents, always slithering through bloodlines. Now it made sense. The letter, the inheritance, the way Benjamin always looked at her, not with pity, but with recognition. She was family, not just by marriage, by blood. And Margaret had known it the whole time. That's why you hated me so much, Amara whispered. Not because I didn't belong, but because I did. Margaret didn't answer, but her silence screamed. Harrison staggered back, running his hands through his hair. Why didn't you tell me? Because you didn't need to know, Margaret snapped. You already chose her. I didn't need you choosing history too. And with that she turned and walked away. No more fight left in her heels. Amara stood there, generations churning in her chest. Grief, anger, power, and something else, belonging. But as she turned back to Harrison, she saw something in his eyes. A flicker. Not of guilt, but something heavier. Fear. What is it? She asked. He hesitated. There's something else you need to know. About the Oakmont Trust. About what else my grandfather left behind. She narrowed her gaze. What do you mean? He reached into his jacket, pulled out a second envelope. I wasn't going to give you this. Not yet. She took it, opened it. Inside was a photograph of her mother, Ruth, standing with Benjamin, and another man, smiling, hand on her shoulder, and scrawled in faded ink on the back, Ruth, Benjamin, and the real father of the child. Amara's heart stopped. It wasn't Benjamin. It wasn't who she thought it was. It was someone still alive, someone closer than she imagined. The photo shook in Amara's hands like a revelation waiting to burst. She stared at it, eyes scanning the grainy faces. Her mother, young, radiant, proud. Benjamin, older, dignified, his hand resting protectively on her shoulder. And the third man, tall, brown-skinned, strong jaw, eyes that mirrored her own, not white, not Vanderwell's, but undeniably hers. She turned the photo over again. The handwriting read, Ruth, Benjamin, and Elijah. May she never know the weight of our silence. Elijah? She whispered. Harrison nodded, ashamed. Your grandfather kept everything. Letters, photos, memories no one else wanted. He told me once that there was a man named Elijah who came to visit the house late at night, before I was born, before my mother married him. Amara's knees buckled. Elijah, the man her mother never spoke of, the man she only referred to in hushed tones when the lights were off and her heart was tired. I thought he was just a ghost, Amara said. Just a name in the dark. But ghosts have roots too. Langford stepped in, clearing his throat. Miss Vanderwells, I believe I know who he is. She turned slowly. Elijah Townsend. He was once a groundskeeper on the estate, left decades ago, but not before forming a connection with Ruth. Where is he now? Amara asked. Langford hesitated. He never left. He's still in town. Lives on the edge of the Oakmont property. Keeps to himself. Still tends roses. Hasn't spoken to anyone from the family since 1993. She couldn't breathe. All these years. All these nights wondering where she came from. Why she didn't quite fit. Why there was always a hole in the shape of a father. And he'd been there, just outside the mansion, planting flowers. Take me to him, she whispered. Harrison looked at her, pain in his eyes. I'll go with you. No, she said, voice gentle but firm. This part, I walk alone. That evening, as dusk spilled across the Oakmont hills, Amara followed the winding path behind the estate, past the fountains, past the orchards, to the little stone cottage wrapped in ivy and silence. She knocked, once, twice. The door creaked open, and there he was, older, gray at the temples, but the eyes, they were hers. He stared at her for a long time, and then, with a voice made of gravel and rain, he said, I knew this day would come. And as he stepped aside to let her in, a letter fell from the table behind him, one with her name sealed. Never sent. The cottage smelled like rosewater and earth, like memories too stubborn to die. Amara stood in the doorway, her heart thudding in her chest like a drum from another lifetime. Elijah Townsend, her father, moved slowly, like each step carried the weight of years spent hiding. He gestured for her to sit by the hearth, but she stayed standing. Her eyes were locked on the yellowed envelope on the floor. It had her name on it. Amara Ruth Townsend. Not Vanderwells, not even Davis. Her mother's maiden name. Townsend. Her true name. Her fingers trembled as she picked it up. The paper was old, torn slightly at the corner. But the seal was intact, waxed and cracked like his voice when he finally said, I wrote that when you were 6. Your mother told me to stay away. Said this world wouldn't be kind to you if they knew. Because you were poor, she asked, eyes never leaving the letter. Because I was me, he said. A black man who had once been a servant to the Vanderwells, falling in love with the daughter of their hidden black bloodline. It was too messy, too loud for her silence. Amara slowly opened the envelope. Inside was a single page, faded ink, careful script. To my daughter, the one I watched from afar. The one I wasn't allowed to hold. The one whose laugh I heard from behind hedges. I know I don't deserve to call you mine, but I loved you from the moment I knew you existed. Every rose I planted at Oakmont, it was for you. Every storm I weathered in silence, it was so you could live untouched by the ghosts that haunt these halls. Forgive me, Amara, not for leaving, but for staying too close and still too far. Elijah. She read it again, and again, until the words blurred. I used to think my father was a myth, she whispered, a name my mother swallowed when she cried into the night. Elijah nodded, his throat tight. I was weak. No, she said. You were scared. And maybe so was she. They sat in silence, the kind that fills wounds instead of widening them. Then, softly, he reached into a worn wooden box beside the fireplace and pulled out a faded photograph. Her, at age 5, sitting on the estate's swing set. I took this the day you learned to pump your legs high enough to fly, he said. You screamed, I'm a rocket. I never forgot it." Amara smiled, and for the first time, it didn't ache. But as the fire crackled, a different warmth filled the room. Not just reconciliation, but recognition. And then Elijah said, "There's something else, child. Something about that house. The Oakmont deed. It holds a secret." Amara turned sharply. "What kind of secret?" He hesitated. "When Benjamin rewrote the trust, he didn't just give you the property. He gave you access to the East Wing." Her eyes narrowed. "The wing that's been locked for decades?" Elijah nodded. "There's a room there. One no one's entered since 1986. Not even Margaret. Why? Because inside that room is the original family ledger. The real one. The one that tells the truth about every dollar that built Oakmont. About every life it stepped on to rise." Amara felt the air shift. "Why would he give me that?" "Because he trusted you to see it. To name the ghosts. And maybe to set them free." Her chest tightened. For years she had only wanted to belong. Now she held the key to the truth. That night, she returned to the mansion, alone, and opened the East Wing door. What she found inside changed everything. The East Wing groaned open like a confession. Dust danced in the moonlight that poured through the stained glass. The floor creaked beneath Amara's heels as she stepped inside. Not as a guest, not as the help, but as the owner. No one else had entered that part of Oakmont in nearly 40 years. The hallway was lined with portraits, but not the curated ones hung in the main ballroom. These were rough, unframed sketches. Charcoal, ink, watercolors on torn parchment. And the faces? Black, brown, unfamiliar, forgotten. Women in aprons, men in field clothes, children clutching books and cotton in equal measure. Amara moved slowly, reverently, like a mourner in a sacred tomb. At the end of the hall was a large wooden door, deep mahogany, carved with vines and initials long eroded by time. She pushed it open. The room smelled like cedar, ink, and secrets. And in the center, atop a pedestal, lay the Vander Wells ledger. Not the polished one in the legal office, not the version Margaret showed the press. This one was raw, heavy, alive with history. Amara flipped it open. The first few pages were ledgers, names, dates, numbers. But not just business transactions. Wages unpaid, labor undocumented. A list of black families who had worked the land for generations, and what they were never given. She flipped further, found sketches of enslaved ancestors, notes scribbled in Benjamin's hand. "Forgive us for every dollar soaked in silence, for every name we forgot." Amara's throat closed. This was the truth. This was the cost of the chandelier light, the ballroom laughter, the pearl necklaces. This was the blood behind the gold. And here she was, a black woman with dark skin, once called the Help, now holding the Book of Reckoning. She could burn it, bury it, or honor it. She reached into her bag and pulled out a fountain pen, and on the last blank page in bold strokes she wrote, "This house now belongs to the daughters of those who built it." She closed the ledger. Tears streamed down her cheeks, not from pain, but from purpose. But just as she turned to leave, she heard something. Footsteps, coming from the other end of the East Wing. Not Harrison, not staff. Slow, heavy, deliberate. She froze. The door creaked open behind her, and a shadow stepped into the light. The air in the East Wing thickened. The shadow stepped into the moonlight, and Amara's breath caught in her throat. It was Margaret, but not the Margaret she knew. Not the pristine matriarch in pearls and cold smiles. This Margaret was barefoot, her robe draped open over a nightgown, her hair unpinned and wild. She looked small, not in size, in spirit, like a statue that had finally started to crack. "I thought I might find you here," she said, her voice rough but not sharp. Amara didn't move. "Should I call security?" she asked flatly. Margaret almost laughed. Almost. "No need. I'm not here to fight. I'm tired." Silence. Amara closed the ledger and held it against her chest. "You've known about this room, about what's inside." Margaret nodded slowly. "I've always known." "Then why keep it hidden?" Margaret looked around at the unpolished portraits, the raw sketches of black faces no one had ever honored. "Because truth makes people uncomfortable, Amara. And discomfort makes money nervous." She stepped closer. barefoot on the marble. "When I was a girl, my father, Benjamin, brought me here once. He made me memorize names I didn't understand, told me they were our history. I thought he'd lost his mind." "He hadn't," Amara whispered. Margaret nodded. "No, he was just ahead of his time." "Then why bury it?" Amara snapped. "Why erase them? Why erase me?" Margaret looked up, and for the first time, her eyes didn't burn. They mourned. "Because you reminded me of what I hated in myself, the part of me that knew the truth and stayed silent anyway." She stepped toward the ledger. "I've spent my whole life managing appearances, protecting the Van der Wells name, but that name was built on backs like yours, and I helped keep the silence alive." Amara's grip on the book tightened. "You called me the help," she whispered. Margaret's chin quivered. "I did. You tried to erase my name, my place, my blood." Margaret's voice cracked. "And I failed." Amara stared at her. The woman who had caused her so much pain, so much shame. She wanted to hate her, but all she saw now was ruin. Beautiful, fragile, human ruin. Margaret reached out and placed a hand gently on one of the old portraits. A young black girl in a cotton dress. "She raised my father," she said. "Henrietta." He called her Mama. "I never understood that. I thought it was weakness." Amara stepped closer. It was love. Margaret's eyes filled with tears she'd refused for decades. "I don't expect forgiveness. I don't even ask for it." She turned to Amara. "But I need you to know. He left it to you because he believed you'd do what I never could. Tell the truth." Amara didn't speak. She just opened the ledger again, held out a pen, and looked at Margaret. "Then start here." Margaret's hands trembled as she took the pen. She wrote her name beneath Amara's, and under it, 3 words. "I was wrong." The silence that followed was holy. Not peace, not yet, but the beginning of it. Then the door creaked again. This time, Harrison stepped in. "Everything okay?" Amara nodded. "I think it finally might be." He looked at the ledger, at the signatures, at the faces on the wall. "Then maybe it's time the world knew." But before they could announce anything, before Amara could even open her mouth, Langford burst into the room, pale, breathless. "Amara," he gasped, "you need to see this. Now." He held out a second legal document, one that had just surfaced. The pages shook in Langford's hands. "Where did this come from?" Amara asked, her voice low, guarded. Langford adjusted his glasses. "A safety deposit box in Savannah. We didn't even know it existed until the bank contacted me this morning. It's a secondary will, dated 3 days after the Oakmont Trust was signed." Amara stared at the old paper in his hand, like it was dynamite wrapped in ribbon. Margaret backed away. No, that's not possible. Benjamin would have told me. He would have told me." Langford hesitated. This one was addressed to a different heir. By name. The world tilted. "Who?" Amara asked. Langford unfolded the paper. It states, "In the event that Amara Van der Wells declines full control of the Oakmont estate, or becomes unable to fulfill its duties, the entire inheritance shall pass to..." He looked up. Eyes flicked to Harrison, then back to Amara. Langford swallowed hard. "Elijah Townsend." The air snapped like a branch underfoot. Amara blinked. "What?" Langford continued. "Benjamin left instructions that if you ever walked away, Elijah, as the surviving elder of Henrietta's line, would inherit everything. The house, the land, the trust." Margaret gasped. Harrison took a step forward, stunned. And Amara laughed, not out of joy, out of justice. "He knew," she said softly. "He knew I might not want to live in a house soaked in silence, and he wanted to make sure it stayed with the ones who built it." Margaret stumbled back, clutching the edge of a chair. "Elijah? That man?" she hissed. Langford glanced at her. "He's more Van der Wells than any of us," Amara whispered. But then something darker slithered into her mind. Why now? Why did this second will suddenly appear? She turned to Langford. "Who found the deposit box?" Langford shifted. "An anonymous call. Said the vault existed. Gave exact details." Amara's eyes narrowed. Too clean. Too convenient. And then it clicked. She turned slowly. Her gaze locked on Harrison. His face was unreadable, but his silence screamed. "You knew," she said. He looked down. "You made the call." He didn't deny it. I thought if you saw what it really meant to hold that legacy, maybe you'd walk away." Maybe we could go back to before. Amara stepped back like his words slapped her. You didn't want me to have it. I wanted us to have peace, he said. No, she snapped. You wanted me to shrink so you could stay comfortable. Harrison's voice cracked. I love you, Amara, but not enough to stand beside my power. Silence. Even Margaret didn't speak. Amara turned, walked to the door. But before she left, she whispered, You're just like your mother, dressed in velvet, hiding thorns. And as she stepped out of the East Wing, away from husband and history, the sky opened with thunder. But baby, thunder always comes before the cleansing. You want to know where she went that night, and what she did next? That night, Amara didn't return to the bedroom she once shared with Harrison. She didn't cry on the staircase or pace the marble halls. She went to the rose garden, Elijah's garden. It was raining light and steady, the kind of rain that doesn't destroy, just softens. She stood beneath the willow tree, her red gown damp and clinging to her skin. The same dress they once tried to shame her in. And in her hands, the second will. She looked at it, read it again, then folded it and set it on fire. The flames curled like gold along the edges. She let it burn until the paper crumbled into ash, black and fine like the soil under her feet, the same soil her ancestors had bled into. That second will was never about protecting legacy. It was about control, fear, and she wouldn't let fear dictate the story anymore. Elijah doesn't need this, she whispered into the smoke. He already has peace. And me? She touched her chest. I have purpose. By morning, the ashes had washed away, just like the lies. She returned to the house not as a wife, not as a Vander Wells, but as Amara Ruth Townsend. She called Langford first. Prepare a public statement, she said. I'm opening the East Wing. To the family? No, to the public. There was a pause. You're sure? I'm not hiding truth anymore, and neither is this house. That afternoon, Oakmont's gates opened to the community for the first time in over a century. Not just donors, not just press, but descendants, families who once worked the land without pay, who once entered only through back doors. Now they walked through the front. Amara gave them tours, showed them the ledger, introduced them to the faces on the walls. This is your story, she told them. And this is your home, too. She created a foundation, not for gala dinners and cocktail dresses, but for scholarships, land repatriation, and archival restoration. She renamed it the Henrietta Project. And in the mansion's grandest hall, she removed the portrait of Margaret, hung a new one of Henrietta, regal, defiant, dark-skinned and proud. Right below it, a brass plaque that read, She raised a dynasty and was buried in silence. Now her name is louder than any chandelier. And Amara, she moved into the East Wing, not as a symbol, as a guardian. But the story didn't end there, because one morning, as sun spilled golden over the estate, a letter arrived. No return address. Inside, a handwritten note from Harrison. I see you now. I saw you then. I was just too afraid to stand where you were already rising. I'm sorry, and if there's still a door left open, I'll wait by it. Amara folded the letter. Didn't cry. Didn't smile either. She placed it on her windowsill. Let the wind decide where it went. Because forgiveness, that was hers to give. But not today. Not yet. And just as she turned to leave the room, she heard footsteps, soft, familiar. When she opened the door, someone was standing there. A woman, in her 20s, skin like hers, eyes wide with wonder. Are you the woman who changed everything? She asked. You want to know who that girl was, baby? And what she came to ask? Amara tilted her head, studying the young woman at her door. She was maybe 22, tall, skin the color of freshly turned soil, hair coiled into a soft halo. Her hands trembled slightly, not with fear, but with reverence. I'm sorry, the girl said, her voice hushed. I didn't mean to just show up like this. Amara stepped aside, motioning her in. You came for a reason. The young woman nodded, clutching a worn notebook to her chest. I'm Nia, she said. My grandmother. Her name was Leona. She worked in this house. Used to tell me stories about the garden, the old kitchen wing, the piano no one played. Amara's breath caught. She remembered Leona, a quiet woman with hands like river stone, who once pressed a warm biscuit into her palm when Margaret wasn't looking. She used to hum old hymns while polishing silver. She passed 3 months ago, Nia said. But before she died, she told me I had to come here, said I needed to see you. Why? Nia opened her notebook. Inside were sketches, notes, pages of oral history passed down by the women in her family. She said I had to bring the stories back home. Amara felt her throat tighten. All this time she'd been restoring a house. But Nia had come to restore the memory. I'm studying history at Spellman, Nia said softly. But no textbook ever taught me about women like my grandmother, or women like you. Amara reached out, touched Nia's notebook with gentle fingers. Would you like to help me curate the East Wing? Make sure every voice gets a name, and every name a story. Nia's eyes filled with tears. I'd be honored. They stood there a moment, 2 black women from different generations, bound not by blood, but by something deeper. Legacy, truth, healing. Later that evening, Amara walked through the halls of Oakmont, the same halls where she'd once been mistaken for staff, where she'd been erased from lists, from lineage. Now her portrait hung on the landing, not smiling, but seen. And beneath it, etched into a brass plate, she walked into that mansion, carrying her dignity like a crown. But they only saw her skin, not her soul, until the day she made them look again. The wind blew through the garden, the willow tree swayed, and from somewhere deep within the soil, the voices of women long forgotten began to hum, a hymn of rebirth, of fire and roots, of thorns and honey. Years later, guests would walk the Oakmont estate and ask the same question, who was she? And the guides would answer, she was the woman who inherited silence and turned it into song. Amara's name now graced books, grants, foundations. But more than that, it lived in the mouths of girls who dared to speak up, in the hands of women who no longer shrunk in designer rooms, in the hearts of those who knew, being dark-skinned, being the help, being forgotten. None of that defined you. What you built after the pain did. Margaret passed quietly in a hospice near the coast. Her will requested one thing, that her ashes be scattered beneath the rose garden Elijah planted. Amara honored it. Forgiveness doesn't always come with words. Sometimes it blooms through action. Harrison remarried years later, sent Amara a photo of his daughter, a brown-skinned child named Grace, and Elijah. He spent his final years tending to a public garden, Henrietta's garden, funded by the estate. He died with soil beneath his nails and peace in his chest. And Nia, she became the first black archivist to lead Oakmont's museum. But on quiet evenings, she'd still visit Amara, sit by her side beneath the willow tree, and listen, because some stories don't end. They echo. If this story touched your heart like it touched mine, leave a word below. Aunt Grace is always here with stories for souls that been through the fire and came out shining. Honey and Thorns. Thanks you for listening.